Okay, here we see a very typical, straightforward illustration of a firm's short-run cost curves. So we have our average total cost curve, we have our average variable cost curve, and we have our marginal cost curve. And then what we also have here is we have three different market prices. So we have a market price of $15, we have a market price of $50, and a market price of 150. Right? And remember, we expect prices to fluctuate in a market over time because we expect firms to be getting in and out of the market, or even we expect the demand to be shifting over time. And so market prices do rise or fall over time. And as supply rises, all else equal, then we expect prices to fall. And as supply declines, all else equal, we expect prices to rise. Basically, the more suppliers there are in a market, the lower the price is going to be. The fewer the suppliers in a market, the higher the prices are going to be. So you can generally think about these different market prices as being different amounts of firms in the market. Again, with this top one representing the least amount of firms and this bottom one representing the most amount of firms. Okay, so let's go back to our profit function. So our profit function is total revenue minus total cost, which is just Q times P star minus Q times average total cost. Because if you go back to the average total cost function, average total cost is equal to total cost divided by Q. If I just solve that equation for average total cost, I get, excuse me, if I just solve that equation for total cost, I get that total cost is equal to quantity times average total cost. So it becomes a very simple way for me to quickly calculate profits. This is what I was saying earlier, is that ultimately the average total cost and average variable cost curves themselves are not super important, because what we're going to use is we're going to use marginal cost and marginal revenue to determine profit maximizing quantity. But we use the average total cost curve to calculate profits, and we'll see how. So our rule for profit maximization under perfect competition is that marginal revenue will be set equal to marginal cost. Okay, again, that marginal revenue will be equal to marginal cost. It is at that point where my profits will mathematically be optimized, where my profits will be mathematically maximized. And so therefore, the firm responds to a particular market price by producing a particular profit maximizing quantity. So for example, if the market price is $150, the firm sees that 1,000 units of the product is where $150 intersects their marginal cost curve. Therefore, they will choose to produce 1,000 units to maximize profits. If the market price falls to $50, the firm will respond by producing 800 units instead. Notice that, as we would assume, as with the law of supply, that as the price falls, the quantity supplied will fall as well. And then we can see even further that as the price falls to 15, if the firm were to still produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, the firm would produce 200 units. We'll actually see in just a moment that if the price were to fall to $15, the firm would actually get out of the market. Okay, so let's actually calculate some profits. So let's suppose that the market price is currently $150. Okay, the firm responds again by producing 1,000 units, and so total revenue is going to be $150 times 1,000 units minus 1,000 units times the average total cost at 1,000 units, which we can see is, if I look at the graph, at 76. So 1,000 times 76, and I calculate that up, and that gives me $74,000. What this tells me is that the firm is currently making $74,000 profit if marginal revenue is 150, which means if the market price is 150. If the market price were to fall to 50, the firm now responds by selling 800 units. And so 800 units times $50 minus 800 units. And then we just go back up to the average total cost curve. And we see that at 800 units, average total cost is at 60. And so 800 units times 60. And I do the math, and I get a profit of negative $8,000. Now, sometimes students are a little worried about negative profits because they tend to think about profits as only being positive. But actually, you want to think about profits as just being a flow of money, which could be positive sometimes and could be negative sometimes. In fact, most small businesses don't earn profits in the first 2 years. And so you actually have 2 years worth of accumulated negative profits that you have to deal with. And so negative profits are in themselves not really an issue, and it isn't necessarily a reason for a firm to get out of the market. But what is a reason for a firm to get out of the market is if the market price ever falls below average variable cost. So if we look at price here at $15, we can see that it intersects the marginal cost curve at a point that is below the average variable cost curve. Now, what this means is that if the firm were to produce at this particular amount, they wouldn't even be covering their fixed cost, right? Because again, you can think about fixed cost as being the distance between the average variable cost and the average total cost curves, right? And so at this particular quantity level, they would no longer even be covering their fixed costs. And so the firm actually would do better by just getting out of the market and paying their fixed costs. They actually would make less negative profits by simply getting out of the market and just paying their fixed cost. And so the general rule is that anytime you have a price that is below average variable cost, the firm wants to shut down and get out of the market. Um, and so the rule is not simply that the firm makes a negative profit. We can see that at a price of 50, the firm makes a negative profit, but still would choose to stay in the market. But at a price of 15, since we are below the average variable cost curve, this means the firm is not covering their fixed cost and therefore would get out of the market. And to this point, we have a very simple kind of breakdown for you to think about when you're sort of formulating what are the kind of baselines for decisions. And so we can think about sort of two very specific and important points. The first one, which we've already kind of discussed just previously, was this shutdown point. And that shutdown point is going to be at the minimum of your average variable cost curve. So our average variable cost curve here, and we can see that the price here that's at that minimum is going to be what we call a shutdown price. And so any price at or below this price is actually going to cause us to shut down, get out of the market, pay our fixed cost, and either go try something else or just go get back in the rat race that our small business didn't work out. If the price is ever above the shutdown price, then this means the firm wants to stay in the market. Now, if we're below the break even, so the break even is the zero profit condition. So we can see if we were to think about this in terms of profits at a price of the break even, we would go over, we would produce the break even quantity. I would go back up to find my total cost. And I could see that total revenue is equal to total cost here. And so this is where we make zero profit. So between the shutdown and the break even, firms are earning negative profits, but they're staying in the market. Now, oftentimes what economists say is that they stay in the market, but they're thinking about getting out. And then if the price ever falls again below the shutdown or to the shutdown or below, then they actually do want to get out of the market. But if the price is in between this zone, then they're staying in the market, but they're thinking about it. And then, of course, the big one is that if the price is ever above the break even, then the firm is going to be earning a greater than zero profit, which is, of course, what every firm wants to do. It's important for us to realize that even if a firm produces in this area here because of a market price and they earn a negative profit, this doesn't mean that the firm is not maximizing profits. Again, it's just like utility. We assume that we're always maximizing utility, that the decisions we're making with respect to consumption are always doing the best with what we have. And we assume the same thing of firms. So when a firm is earning negative profit, we're left to assume that that is because of market conditions and not necessarily because of poor business decisions. Now, of course, in the real world, the markets are rife with very poor business decisions. And arguably the big issue with small businesses is probably a lack of business acumen. But one should not, I think, neglect to also recognize that markets themselves can be really difficult to navigate. And so some of it really is just purely market conditions. All right, so to wrap all of this up, perfect competitors are price takers, which essentially means that they face a perfectly elastic demand curve. That last part's not super important, but if you think about what a perfectly elastic demand curve is, a perfectly horizontal demand curve, then you can see that this would mean that the firm would have to charge that market price. That they couldn't charge a price above or a price below, because in fact, a perfectly horizontal demand curve would mean that there would be no demand above or below it. And so again, you can see that this locks the firm in to charging that market price. Firms set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost by choosing a quantity that maximizes profits. So we saw that in the previous slides, that the firm will see where the marginal revenue is, which again is the market price, and will choose the quantity that aligns marginal revenue and marginal cost. And this will mathematically be the profit maximizing decision of the firm within the context of the market conditions, most specifically the current condition of the market price. The market price is always a firm's marginal revenue. So what this ultimately means is that a firm makes a decision based upon market conditions and their own cost structure. Okay, if the decision to make a quantity is based on marginal revenue, which is the market price, and marginal cost, which is from the firm's cost structure, then this means that the firm's cost structure, that is their own identity, sort of intermingles with the market conditions and produces a profit maximizing quantity. And so this is really the way I want you to think about markets and how they work. It's not so much that you have all of these firms making very specific decisions and then that's what creates market conditions. Okay, the way we think about it is that market conditions exist and then firms are making decisions within that context. Lastly, marginal cost curve is the firm's short run supply curve. If you go back and you look at the previous curve, and you'll notice that every time the marginal revenue rises or price rises, our framework tells us to produce more. And every time the price falls, which means the marginal revenue falls, this framework tells us to produce less, which is exactly what the supply curve tells us. As the price rises, I'm willing to supply more. As the price falls, I'm willing to supply less. And because I specifically produce the quantity that aligns marginal revenue and marginal cost, the marginal cost curve is literally the firm's short run supply curve.